Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. Today we are so incredibly honored to be joined by Senator Busson, representing the beautiful province of British Columbia. She is named Commander of the Order of Merit of Police Forces, awarded the Vice Chief of Defense Staff Commendation, the Order of British Columbia, and member of the Order of Canada, among countless other awards and distinctions. She is one of, if not the leading voice for advancement of women in policing and national security in Canada today. Senator Busson, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
It's my pleasure. Nice to meet you and nice to be here.
As you know, we actually have a pretty cemented tradition on our podcast where the first question is always a 50-50 guessing challenge. And because you already correctly guessed who was Jason and who was Jerry based on our different colored backgrounds, we wanted to ask you and throw you another question. So, who do you think is older, Jason or Jerry?
I'm going to say that Jerry's the oldest. You're the oldest.
Oh, that's unfortunately wrong. I'm Jason, and I'm the older one just by 3 minutes.
Oh, there
Probably
you
the
go.
best 3 minutes of my life. But yeah, great. Now that you know how to tell us apart and who's older, let's dive straight in the episode. Jerry and I are well aware of all the incredible work that you've done for Canada. But for listeners at home who might not be as familiar, we are wondering if you could please introduce yourself and share how your journey into public office began.
Okay, well, thanks very much. My name is Bev Busson, and as you say, I now represent British Columbia in the Senate. I was born in Nova Scotia, and spent my formative years there through school, and went to a teachers college in Nova Scotia. When I was graduated from teachers college, the RCMP made the wise decision to accept women as regular members of the force for the first time. So I actually joined the very first class of women to ever be regular members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Transferred, of course, they go to boot camp in Regina, and from Regina, you're transferred all over Canada. So I ended up being transferred straight to British Columbia. So that's how I found myself there and decided to spend my career. Well, they decided I was going to spend most of my career there in the RCMP. And so I started and spent 16 years in
Wow.
operational policing, and
Wow.
then got a law degree from the University of British Columbia, and that stayed within the force. But from there, my career sort of went a little bit more in the management side. So I was found myself in charge of still operational policing, but on the more on the management side. I was in charge of some pretty interesting um, sections, like a very elite surveillance section, and then I went in charge of criminal operations for the province of Saskatchewan for a while. Then I went in charge of the province of Saskatchewan as the commanding officer, and then was transferred back to British Columbia as the commanding officer for British Columbia. And then I became the commissioner of the RCMP, which is the first woman commissioner, the first woman who had been the commanding officer of any province, and I was first woman commanding officer of two provinces. So I have to pinch myself every once in a while to realize it's really me with all these important people and pictures that I have in my office. So it's a pretty I've had a pretty certainly interesting and a life full of surprises for me, as well as I think the people who know me, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story. We'll
right.
definitely be revisiting many of those elements and many of the firsts later on in our conversation. Our second question comes in two parts. So first, we're wondering, what do you think are the most pressing problems concerning youth in Canada as a whole right now? And secondly, what do you think are the most paramount issues for youth in British Columbia?
Okay. Problems for youth today. It I think the biggest problem for youth today, as I look out and see people coping with what's happening, is perhaps too much information and too little control.
Right.
I try to put myself in the place of somebody perhaps at your age, just getting ready to graduate and head towards university or whatever you plan to do, trade school or whatever your next dream might be. And there's so much out there that you have to try to absorb. And the two problems with that, there's no filters on truth
Hmm.
and there's no filters on content. So you have to cope with all of that, and at the end of the day, feel like you have so little control over the next stage. Generations before you had less and less of that. People could control what their young people, what their children and their friends saw and heard, their grandchildren saw and heard, their children saw and heard, and had a much more control over how that was digested and how it came into people's being. Nowadays, it's not controlled. So you're inundated with all of this information, and a lot of it is either disinformation, or remanaged or AI'd, and then of course on the other side you're made to feel like you have no control, which I understand there's some people in one of the podcasts that you may be looking to do is around vote 16 and those kinds of things, to try to take more control over your own futures, because certainly, I just as an aside to this, and I know we don't have a lot of time, you look back over the young people in other generations, although it wasn't an information assault that they were dealing with. They were dealing with world wars. They were dealing with pandemics they couldn't control. So each generation has had a challenge, and each generation in the past has managed the challenge. So I believe that this generation will manage the challenge as well. And I'm an eternal optimist, but when I meet young people like yourself and probably your followers, I'm convinced and inspired that we have lots to look forward to.
For sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the concept and idea of information overload is definitely a concern that we experience almost on a daily basis and definitely see, in the youth around as well. So thank you so much for that insight. Next, we'd like to turn towards your remarkable journey in protecting our country. We know you have one of the most incredible paths into the RCMP, which began, as you've described, like a bolt of lightning, as you said, hearing the radio announcement that the RCMP just opened applications to women while driving to your teaching position. And in that moment, you signed up, and from there, the rest was history, as you've had such an illustrious career, as you said, becoming the first female commissioned officer in Canada ever, the first female commanding officer of a province, and so, so much more, breaking down countless systemic barriers in what was, and very much still is, a male-dominated institution. So we were wondering if you could please share some of the challenges you faced as part of being the first cohort of women ever to enter the RCMP, and how you overcame them, both, I guess, early in your career and later in your leadership roles as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And for those who don't know, in the first troop, when we were first all sent to Regina, the class was all women. There were 32 of us, and they were all women. They don't do that anymore. They integrate troops because, of course, when you get into the field, you have to work with people of both genders, whether you like it or not. So they learned early that uh, uh, gender-specific troops were not a really good idea. But at the time, there were 32 of us, and we bonded very quickly because of the challenges that we were facing. And I have to admit, when I was 22 years old at the time, I have to admit that I wasn't really aware of this trailblazing moment. I was just excited about joining an elite and amazing police force, and being chosen for that, and looking forward to the adventures I expected and actually in reality did encounter. And I was blissfully unaware of just how political and how transformational this was for the RCMP, and indeed for the country. So when I first went to my first posting, which is a little town in central British Columbia, people treated me like a rock star. Like it was quite to me. People wanted to they'd never seen a woman in a uniform in an RCMP police car. So you can imagine, in a little town, that was pretty interesting for them, and they felt, I don't know how, I think the mayor, I don't know how it was, but I got quite a lovely welcome when I arrived. I think they felt a little special that they'd been chosen to get one of the first women. So I had a great start from the first day, and I think my trainer was selected. I think he got voluntold, but he was well selected. He was a really fine police officer, and was open to the fact of having women in the force. So I had a great start from that perspective as well. So not everybody in my troop had that advantage, but I was lucky enough to get that welcoming feeling when I first got there. And I didn't want to be the best. I just wanted to be my best. And I spent my whole career not trying to best anyone but myself, and just trying to do, reach my own potential and work as hard as I could to my own expectations. And in circumstances, oftentimes you find that you underestimate what you can do in as you move forward through a career or through a challenge that you've taken on for yourself. But I at the very beginning, again, I think I was a little, I won't say, I don't say naive, but I say again blissfully unaware of what was happening from the outside in. When I was in a room getting a briefing on something that was happening, perhaps some expected crowd control issue or whatever, as a young constable, I looked around the room and saw people like myself. They looked around the room and saw this woman standing there all by, the only woman in the room. I never got to see that. So I just melded as much as I possibly could and just considered myself one of the group, one of the team. I never tried to outdo them, tried to outdo myself as a constable, and gained. I had a few things happen early in my career that made me look like a pretty smart police officer. Solved a few crimes, break and enters and things like that other people would have perhaps walked away from or didn't take that extra step. I don't know, but I very very early in my career um, had a few small successes from a police perspective, but from a perspective of myself, people were all of a sudden, oh, she can actually solve crimes and she can actually arrest people. I ended up arresting someone on my third day all by myself,
Wow. Wow.
which was it was kind of, I got kind of trapped into it. It was a person in the road, in the middle of the road, and disoriented on either. I think at that time alcohol was a big thing, and so I couldn't drive past him. I was going to I think a school talk, and I just couldn't drive past him. So I took him into custody for his safety and brought him back to the police office, and everybody in the whole town knew about it within about an hour. So I had some lucky things happen that kind of cemented my, I guess you'd call it, my credibility, my street cred, is it's kind of the term for it. So I was very very lucky, and again, you might notice I have a bit of a positive attitude. I'm a
For sure.
glass half full kind of a gal. So it kind of fed my own belief that, hey, maybe I can really do this. Maybe I really am suited for this. And so as I moved forward through my career into leadership roles, I used to try to put myself in the place of the person I was leading or in charge of or whatever, and say, now, if if I wanted a boss, if I was in their place, what would I want my boss to do or be? And I try to emulate that person, because I really believe when you ask people to do extraordinary things, and policing is a very dangerous job, and you're asking people to do dangerous things every single day. So you can't just treat them like a number, like a cog in the wheel. You have to make sure that they understand that you get it, that what they're doing is important. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what that would look like, and I had a bit of it's not mine. It was a boss I had who mentored me, and of course I had all male mentors because I was the only female around for a very long time. So much as people tend to think that women have women mentors, every mentor I ever had was a male, because there were no women
Yeah.
to mentor me. So, and one of them, and I think it was right after I got my law degree and was feeling pretty good about myself. One of my bosses reminded me, and it's something I've always lived with, and it's a little saying that said, "Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care."
Wow.
And
Wow.
that, in my job as I move forward, I thought, all these folks, see me with my law degree and all this jewelry on my shoulders, but I need them to know that I care about them before I ask them to do all these important things. And even as I've moved on to the Senate, I found that one of the successes that I've experienced in the Senate, being involved in and a lot of legislative work, and there's team building as well in the Senate, with colleagues and moving forward, that I've used that same kind of philosophy, that it's not just about what you know, it's about how you build the confidence and the trust with the people that you work with, that really makes the job you do, first enjoyable, and number two effective. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but
No,
I've
no, no,
tried.
you did. Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that was incredibly inspiring to see how you've always continued to lead with such impact. Our next question at the same time is, despite the immense progress that you've helped drive in recent years, it has been slightly disheartening to see RCMP's data showing that officer shortages have significantly worsened over the past 2 years, with shortfalls of at least 3,400 officers as of September of 2025 and nine divisions exceeding the critical vacancy threshold. And given that these growing pressures on operational capacity, we're wondering, what do you see as the main factors driving these recruitment challenges? And what steps could be taken to better attract and support young Canadians in pursuing careers in such a critical field?
Mhm. Interesting question. And of course, it's been a number of years, too many years since I was in charge of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But most police forces are facing the same issues these
Right.
days. Specifically for the RCMP, there's increases in population, increases in demands for the kinds of work that were really never envisioned. So, admittedly, the RCMP has not kept up with the training. I keep fairly close touch with certain folks in the RCMP because of my job. I need to be up to date on what their challenges are, and I'm told that the numbers of people who apply are not shrinking. It's the numbers of people they can process.
Hmm.
They need more
Wow.
people, and the process is incredibly slow, and it's difficult to drop stages in that process because of course you don't want people to get through the filter to make sure at the other end of the process the right people are putting on that red uniform and moving forward.
Sure.
So the big problem, of course, the more people you pull out of operational policing to do the training, because they have to have police experience, it almost exacerbates the problem of the people on the road. That's one issue, and just the capacity at Regina. Um, I believe that if the force had the could get the message out and right message to the powers to increase the training capacity and the capacity for recruiting to have more people doing the recruiting and filtering process, that it would make a big difference. Issues like in British Columbia, and I know in Ontario as well, issues around the uh, uh, kidnappings that are taking place and the shootings and the extortions. That takes a lot of very smart and
Right.
well equipped and well trained police officers to address those things. So when you pull people out of other positions to go to these new task forces, you have to be prepared to do the backfill. And
Right.
I think most police forces have been caught a little short-footed on how many more people it takes to be effective. We've got the FIFA um, uh, tournaments coming
Yeah.
up. That
Right.
takes a huge amount of person power and a lot of policing um, responsibility tied up in making sure that people are safe during. And that just doesn't come. You just can't pull someone off the street and say, "Here's a 3-week course
Yeah.
in." It's a long-term thing. So it's gonna take a while, but I really think that the force needs a concerted understanding of the fact that they need to perhaps increase their training capacity, open another training center, do pull some people out of retirement, those kinds of things that wouldn't affect the quality, but it would certainly affect their ability to meet their quotas.
For sure, yeah. Thank you so much for that. I guess our next question is, even outside the RCMP, we know throughout your entire career, you have dedicated yourself to Canadian national security and defense policy. And in fact, you serve as an advisor to the government on national security. So we wanted to ask, in such a tumultuous time of global conflict, what are your thoughts on Canada's current defense strategy? More specifically, how do you assess Canada's recent commitments, including reaching 2% of GDP in defense spending, the roughly $32 billion investment in Arctic sovereignty, and the push to source 70% of Canada's defense goods domestically? Do you believe this approach is on the right track, or are there areas you would change or strengthen?
Well, I have to say you've certainly done your homework, Jason. I have to say, I totally agree with the direction that we're going. I think we got caught in a relationship with another country where we thought that it was a good partnership, and it turns out that it wasn't a good partnership. So now we have to stand on our own and do the things we need to do. I'm very proud of what the government's been doing from a citizen's perspective, and I think we're absolutely on the right track to be able to claim our sovereignty by ourselves.
For sure.
And I think that that's a great step forward. I hope we can continue to find ways and opportunities in the North specifically. We're getting a lot of people stepping up that live there and understand the land, Indigenous people there. We need
Right.
to rely on them to make sure that we understand what the weaknesses are there as far as our defense strategy is concerned. And when everybody's pulling in the right direction, I believe the 2% is important, and I think we can make huge value added to that 2%.
Thank you so much for that. And throughout this conversation, I think it's pretty clear you've broken countless glass ceilings and inspired others to pursue paths that once seemed out of reach, both in policing and beyond. And you've continued to empower women through initiatives like Women's Executive Network Mentorship Program. So we specifically want to ask about women in politics. We know in recent years it has been really encouraging to see more women entering politics. So, for instance, women now make up 65% of the 105 seats in the Senate, which is just incredible. But if we look towards the House of Commons, for example, that number is only around 30% of the
Mhm.
343 seats. So clearly, there's still a long, long ways to go. So our
Mhm.
question is, in your opinion, what do you see as the most effective ways to increase women's representation in elected office, and how can we better support more women to run for and succeed in politics?
Yeah, thank you for that. I was also happy to see that there had been at one time one of the politicians had wanted a quota of 50-50 women in the Senate. And I used to ask the question in a lot of cases, like, why 50-50? Like, if we're going on merit, why stop at 50? There's so much potential in both men and women to reach goals, so long as we select on merit. And one of the things, I think, one of the big barriers for women, and I've often seen it in policing as well, not just the RCMP, but other jobs where they had been at one time male oriented, they accept women, and then they forget about the women's other responsibilities to the family, to families, and to the communities in general. So I think people have to make not just make room, realize that women bring such a valuable perspective, and they need to make space for women who are still having children, have young children as responsibilities, and they're starting. You see now more women bringing their young children to Parliament. The Senate has a little bit older group of women there, so that's the young children isn't a problem, but still responsibilities to their families, not just children, their husbands. It seems that years ago, it was an all-male world, and the women looked after the men's problems at home. Now that women are stepping out, we need to make space and create an environment that has a work-life balance that never really existed. Work-life balance, that word was never in the vocabulary in the 50s or 60s. Men worked 20 hours a day or 18 hours a day when they needed to, and women kept the home fires burning. Now we don't have that. So work-life balance matters to the male and female side of the workplace. And I think a bigger focus on that would add value and add perspective to the work that needs to be done.
For sure. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, just adding that work-life balance, I think, is critical. All right, for the last part of the interview, we wanted to shift gears and talk a little bit more about youth. I guess in recent years, very unfortunately, youth engagement in politics has been on a significant decline, evidenced by low youth voter turnout rates across the country and younger voices remaining underrepresented in government. So our question is, in your opinion, how can youth become more engaged within the political sphere and play a much more active role in our democracy today?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I agree. It's a sad thing. And I'm I try not to do this, but I have to do it in this case. When I was a young person, civics in school, or whatever there's got to be a better name for it, but civics in school was a mandatory subject in, I think, grade 10 and 11, where I grew up. And now it's barely an elective, I
Yeah.
understand, in a lot of places. And I think that is tragic because um, politics and the dynamic of people becoming involved in democracy, in their own futures, which is what they're doing, can be an incredibly exciting thing. So I think that maybe even in the earlier grades, young people should be introduced into democracy, and specifically our democracy, which I believe is one of the best models there is. People will, I mean, we could get into a lovely debate about the monarchy, but I think the history and the tradition that's tied up with the amount of rights and freedoms that we have is a wonderful circle of
Yeah.
life. As far as that's just my opinion, but when you think about it and get a chance to talk about it, it I think it's inspiring for to have as a discussion. So I believe one of the two things is that young people earlier in their school careers ought to be exposed to subjects around around democracy and civics at the appropriate levels. And the other thing that I think is kind of tragic in Canada, we are such a vast and amazingly beautiful country, and I find that young people don't get a chance to travel as much as they could or should. And I think schools should somehow find a way, maybe once in a young person's lifetime, get a chance to travel from one side of the country to the other on a school
Yeah.
sponsored trip. I meet so many kids in British Columbia, and of course, I still have ties in Nova Scotia, who have never been to the other side of their country, or to the north, or to some other vast place where they're unaware. And once you get to know this country, you want to know more about how it came together and how it stays together and how it's so important to be together as a country. You get such an appreciation for us as Canadians. So that's one of the things I've always aspired to promote, is getting more people to get to know each other on in different parts of this amazing country. And I think it inspires citizenship.
Cool. Thank you for all your thoughtful and nuanced answers for all of our questions today. And now it's time for the final question, which we always make fun. And it'll probably be the hardest question of
Oh
today.
dear. Oh
So,
dear.
we know you've done so much for Canada and have had the opportunity to live across our beautiful country, as you mentioned, from Nova Scotia to Saskatchewan to British Columbia, and now obviously in Ottawa as a senator. But if you could only live in one of these provinces for the rest of your life, which one would it be and why?
Oh my goodness. That's a really, really hard question. My goodness. Well, where I live in British Columbia, as I said, is in the interior. It's not anywhere near the coast, but it's on a vast lake surrounded by mountains, and the water is clear. We have a little issue with forest fires these days, but I'm hopeful that we're going to get a plan. And I would choose to live there because it has everything. I have a 4 hour drive to the ocean, and my lake has a boat and a dock on it, and my grandchildren visit. So I will stay exactly where I am. And I encourage everybody to visit a place like that in either their province, or certainly if they want to come to British Columbia, I can recommend the interior as a second choice to a lot of people want to see Vancouver, but it's a 4 hour drive to where I live, and do both.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're from BC as well, so that would be in our choice as well. Cool.
Wonderful.
That concludes our interview today. Again, I hope it's clear throughout the interview, but we've had the privilege of speaking with one of the most remarkable and inspiring Canadians ever. And if you could not tell, we are beyond honored. So again, we would like to extend such a big thank you to Senator Busson and her phenomenal team as well for this incredible opportunity and taking the time out of her extremely busy schedule to come here and speak with us today. We truly appreciate it. For all the listeners at home, if you guys wish to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune into future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for the opportunity and the inspiration.